you would never have the 6 trade unions in France, trade union federation. 6, they don't, we have one AFL-CIO basically, they have 6 federations of unions who hate each other. I've been to their meetings, they hate each other. But they got together, they're doing this together, and it's the left wing in each of them that went to the others and said, this is an historical, those linkages, which you can't kind of point to, that are kind of the complicated nature of all human relationships. They're the key thing. They have that in Europe. They never lost it. And it is serving them very well now. We don't have it. We did lose it. And so we are at a much more primitive stage. We have to build in the United States the mechanisms and the organization. The anger is out there. The upset is out there. The anger and the Tea Party is an expression on the right because the left doesn't give any expression yet to it. That's the difference. And it means we have to build these organizations in order to catch up with our European brothers and sisters. Okay, thank you for your attention. Let's take a 5-minute break and we'll open
in the last 30, 35 years or so is deindustrialization. And so even if the US government could succeed in devaluing the currency, but does the manufacturing sector still have enough weight in this economy for that to be a realistic strategy of any kind, exporting our way out of the debt? Secondly, would not what has become the dominant sector in this economy, that is the financial sector, and also lenders around the world, would not they oppose the devaluation of the currency because they don't want to be paid back in depreciated dollars?
Okay. Very good question. Let me try to respond to the second one first and then the first one. Yes, China, for example, is very nervous about the amount of its wealth that it holds in what are called dollar-denominated securities for exactly this reason. If the United States systematically devalues the dollar, really commits to that in a major way, then the United States is reducing the wealth of China. It's literally diminishing the value of those dollars that they have. That's an assault on the Chinese economic system. The question will be, what do the Chinese do? Over the last year, the Chinese have not only not purchased more US treasuries, they've unloaded. I believe it's somewhere near $100 billion worth. Now they have over $1 trillion, so they still have an enormous amount, but they are, and one of the reasons most people think they're doing that is to deal already now with the risk of a devaluation of the dollar that they worry about. And there are many others who hold their wealth in dollars, all of whom would be aggrieved by this policy. So they also weigh in against doing that. And they are also taking their steps to protect themselves. Oil exporting countries typically hold big dollar reserves. They're worried. Saudi Arabia, places like that. Very serious, and they have a lot of influence in Washington. So you're absolutely right about that. On the deindustrialization, my guess is that the United States has enough revenues, enough resources, that if they could get the wages down, they believe with a good devalued dollar where the exports are attractive abroad, they could in fact rebuild their manufacturing base. And the best example is what the government did when it took over the collapsed General Motors Corporation. What General Motors has become is a steadily cheaper car-producing entity. Roughly, just roughly, the dollar wage of an older worker is still $28, $29. The new workers, and the UAW agreed to this, the new workers being hired are being hired at around $14 an hour. Okay, if you put together $14 an hour and government subsidies, you're beginning to get your automobile business on a par where it can compete. And that, I believe, is a strategy they want to explore. The problem is it's fundamentally dependent on a drastic cut in the wage levels of the United States, and no one knows whether the American working class will accept it. They were able to get it through at General Motors, but under extraordinary circumstances. When the government took over General Motors, the government basically said to GM and the UAW, the union that represents the workers, either you accept what we're going to do, or this is going to be over, and all your workers will have no job. We will close this factory, we will close this enterprise, there'll be no General Motors. Well, you know, if you believe that's true, if that's not a bluff, then you accept it. They accept it. So they dropped the wages in half. That's stunning. Try to imagine yourself going to work one morning and having your employer basically sit you down for a little conversation, being sure to tell you, sit down, this is not going to feel good. We want you to stay, we appreciate your work. But as of tomorrow, you will be paid half of what you've been earning. That's what those people in Michigan and in Lordstown and the other places where GM exists, that's what they've done. Young workers, new workers. The older ones are kept, they're grandfathered in at the old wage rate. But the new hires, and as the old ones retire or get sick or move away, the new ones replacing them are constantly lowering the wage bill. And my guess is they're going to see lots of industrial places in the country under the pressure to do that. And if going bankrupt and calling the government in works with General Motors, then here, I got a hint for you. We're going to see a lot more of that, because that allows something to be done under the drama of the whole business that might not be doable any other way. Yeah?
What would the difference be in that circumstance for the worker and for General Motors to say that you're not going to solve your problems on my back? What's the difference between him saying that and the French worker saying you're not going to solve the problems on my back?
Enough on the...
Well, if General Motors is viable because labor is devalued, and if in France the workers strike and say you're not going to tax us,
Oh, you mean then they would suffer because they're outcompeted by the cheap American worker?
you either take the money out of the man's pocket or you reduce the man's income.
Okay. What's to prevent that from happening?
Yeah, isn't it the same thing?
Yes, maybe I'm dense.
Well, why aren't the French workers in the same blackmailed situation?
Why do we agree?
Well, the French worker operates in a different political situation. The French worker doesn't believe, and it's been a terrible problem for the French capitalists. The French worker doesn't believe that his problems are his. That is, his problems are the problems, you know, it's really important, are the problems of a class. They have to be addressed as a social issue. If you know how European unions work, they generally make contracts for the whole country. They don't do like we do here, a contract for each employer. Okay, they don't do that, because that allows, of course, each employer to play off the workers one against the other. So they make for a whole industry or for a whole country. So the French people believe they can make it impossible for their capitalists to blackmail them in an effective way. Let me give you an example. In a French union struggle, they would say, you can't cut our wages. Well, then we can't make any money. Okay, then we'll take it over and we'll run it as a government enterprise. Get lost, drop dead. We don't need you. Goodbye. At which point the French capitalists realize, I better accept some kind of deal here because I'm going to get... And I think the same would happen in the United States if it were done that way, but it isn't. Remember, in many European countries, the biggest companies go back and forth between being state companies and private companies. Renault, the biggest French car company, that's been a government company most of its existence. Then it gets private. Then the government takes it over again. When the mass movements put a pressure on these companies, you must do it. We won't do it. Oh, yes, you will. We'll just take you. You know, you're done. Goodbye. You're gone. We will run it now. In the end, I mean, they do have to compete in the world, and that's a serious issue. But there's lots of ways to compete in the world. The United States constantly says, in order for us to compete, we have to lower the wages. A little lesson in economics, right? A little less. Very simple. Very simple. All of economics that's interesting is very simple. I've mentioned to you sometimes before, economists are like lawyers. They take a very simple idea, then they write it up in a language nobody can understand. Then they charge you a fee to translate it back into the simple-mindedness it always was in the first place. And you pay because you don't understand the gobbledygook. That's economics. I can say what I'm about to say in a language you will all go to sleep. And then a few of you will need to know the answer, and I'll charge you a lot to translate it back. I'm going to save all of you that by making it as simple as it obviously is.